Let's focus on our validation errors now. Now, we saw this a little bit earlier when we posted this through. We get a huge list of expected values. Now, if we check out the network tab and the GraphQL query here and we get the response back, we can see that we don't actually get any of the validation errors in here that we would normally need back. Now, if we head over to our playground quickly and we play this through, we do actually get validation inside of here because, for example, the job title is empty. Now, the reason for this is if we just go ahead and add in here the job title and say that's a string and a required value to be passed through, and we replace this out with the job title, we actually get a slightly different error, which is pretty much what we're just seeing in our console. Now, if we get rid of this altogether in terms of this being a required value to be passed in, we're now allowing an empty value to be passed into this, and therefore validation then kicks in. So what we need to do is change up the query that we have here just to get rid of these all as required values. It doesn't actually mean that they're going to be allowed to be null because we're handling validation on the back end, but instead we're just going to make sure that we can actually pass null values into this so our validation kicks in. So we're going to do that for every single one. Let's try this out again over on our client and see the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and send this through, and let's take a look now. Now we get a slightly different message, which is that the validation actually failed. And if we come under extensions and validation, you can see that we've got these for all of them, including the tags connect. So that is required. So now that we've changed that up, what we can do is over in create, after we have successfully created the listing, we want a catch instead, so we can go ahead and catch them errors. So let's go and grab the errors from here. Now, doing a console log on this to kind of find this out is a little bit tricky, because what we're going to see, if we just try and create this listing again, is just a kind of dump of this where we can't inspect anything. Now, what we can use instead is console.dir, which will give us an interactive list. So let's try that one more time, and we should now be able to click through and see the GraphQL error. So this is now the error that we get back. So this is what we want to pluck out all of the validation from. So to do this, let's create out a piece of data in here just called errors. Let's set this to just null by default. And then when we do catch an error, we can follow this through and we can set the errors inside of here. There are other ways of validating. If you need more complex validation, then you might want a kind of front-end solution for the validation rather than doing this after it's submitted. But either way, we can now say GraphQL errors. So we know that's where the errors lie. And then if we look in here, we've got an array with just 0 key, just one key in there. And then inside of here, we then have our extensions and validation, which contains all of these. So we can just say extensions validation, and that should collect up the errors into this errors piece of data on our form. So we can check this out now just by kind of dumping this at the top of the page. So let's output these errors up here, and let's go ahead and submit this again. And we should see all of them errors. So now all we need to do is map them up to each of the fields that we have on our page, and that will show all of our validation errors. Now I'm going to do one of these just to demonstrate this, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill them all out, and you can do the same as well if you're following along, just to save a little bit of time. So the first thing that we want to do is underneath the input, we want to output an error. So let's go ahead and add some styling to this. Let's make this small, give this some red text and a margin top of 1, and let's just say error in there just to make sure that looks okay. And I think that looks fine. And then for the input itself, we want to add in maybe just a border of red as well. So that should give us the following. Great. So that's how we want the validation error to look. Now let's focus on this one first. So we only want to show this if the errors that we have contains input job underscore title. And then inside of here, we can output errors and input job title and grab the first error from that. Because if we look at the stack here, that's an array, much like you would normally find within Laravel validation. So for the actual border itself, we can bind in a class. So we can bind in border red 500 at the same condition. So if this exists, so let's pop that in there as well. So with that done, let's go ahead and try this out. And it looks like that's not worked. So let's set this to an array. an object. And there we go. So that's a plain object by default when none of them errors exist. Now if we hit create listing, sure enough, we see the error just inside of here. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these out for all of the rest, and then we'll come back to the tags, which is very slightly different in the way that we style this. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just filled all of these out, so we should now see every single one of these give back an error. Now the only thing that you need to think about with the errors is that when we're creating these through GraphQL, remember we're using that create method of actually attaching the user and creating them at the same time. So this is a very, very slightly different key that we're using to determine this. So if you get stuck with this, just make sure you inspect the output or the result of the network request. Now for the tags, this is slightly different because of course we're using a third-party plugin here. So let's go up to our tags and figure out how we can get the error shown on here. Now it should be pretty straightforward in terms of the class around the outside. Let's just try this out. It may not work. So let's say input dot, and for this we need tags.connect, remember, because that's how we are hooking this up over here. We're saying tags connect. Let's try this out, and it looks like that does not have a border on it. Let's just try and submit this through again. Yeah, it doesn't work. So let's add in an initial border, because that's probably why. So let's say border 2, border gray 200. So effectively what we're doing is we're setting a border around the outside, and then we're going ahead and styling it. And of course what you could also do is set that to rounded large, but you can fiddle around with the styles if you want to of the actual input using that package. So I think that looks okay. Let's just add in an extra error message just underneath there, and then that is our validation done. So this, remember, is tags.connect, and the same here, tags.connect. Okay, let's have a look, and let's submit this through again, and there we go. Great. So that is required. If we enter something in there now, hit create listing, that looks like it works. So at least we have a tag in there, and all of that validation looks like it's good. Okay, great. So now that we've done that, let's just make sure that we are not logging anything out anymore. And we are, so let's get rid of that. And that's pretty much our very basic validation straight from the back end. But like I said, you could add some inline validation when the user's filling this out for a better user experience.